Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Bennett, Executive Director for North America for Compo, French company in the book industry for 53 years. I am delighted to have with me today Brian O'Leary, who's the Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group and has really done some amazing things. I've been involved with the BISG myself for the past 3 or 4 years, participating in a number of committees, and I've seen firsthand the work that they do, and it does have a lot of benefit for the industry. So just a little bit of background on Brian. He is, as I mentioned, the executive director of the Book Industry Study Group, which is the trade association that addresses challenges across the entire publishing supply chain, from publishers to retailers to libraries, printers, and even service providers. And the committees of the BISG focus on anticipating and solving structural and sometimes highly technical changes that shape the industry. Prior to life at BISG, Brian was an entrepreneur. He founded Magellan Media, a consultancy that helped publishers improve content workflows and adapt to digital change. He's an author. The book he co-authored is called Book, A Futurist's Manifesto, and he's written extensively on metadata, territorial rights, digital exports, and the impact of free content and piracy on book sales. Earlier in his career, he was senior VP and associate publisher at Hammond Inc. And for Time Inc. magazine publisher, he managed production and distribution for Time Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, and People. He holds an MBA from Harvard University School and an AB in chemistry from Harvard College. So welcome, Brian.
Thanks. Sounds like I've done one of everything. Maybe I
Well,
have.
I sort of think you have. Well, today's conversation, we'd like to talk about how BISG is changing the book industry and helping the book industry. So let me just start off by saying, Brian, that like many industries, book publishing has a lot of trade associations, such as in our case, the AAP, the Association of American Publishers, BMI, Book Manufacturers Institute, ABA, American Booksellers Association, IBPA, etc. What's different about BISG versus all those others?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting because this is an industry, even though it's relatively small, it has about 24 associations that are kind of in that bucket of representing some interest within the industry. The thing that's different about us versus AAP, BMI, or others is that they represent a specific constituency. So publishers, print manufacturers, and paper manufacturers, booksellers, et cetera. Our membership consists of companies drawn from across the industry. So that includes publishers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, libraries, and industry partners like Compo. And it's a really useful model because everybody has an equal seat at the table. They're coming to a conversation about any topic, and our core topics are things like metadata, rights, supply chain, workflow, and subject codes, which is the BISAC subject code standards that we maintain. But everybody who comes from across the industry has an equal seat at the table and the opportunity to both contribute to and ask for changes in the work that we're doing. We solve problems that affect two or more parts of the business. The metadata kind of flows across all aspects of it. And in many ways, so too do rights. And we're really set up both through our committees and our working groups to be a problem-solving organization. It's a nice place to be. We're not lobbying. We're really trying to get to the core of what creates an issue between trading partners and how can we either change what we're doing or adapt to solve a problem that is affecting the industry. It makes us more efficient and I think more effective over time.
And do you cooperate with some of those other more specific organizations or associations like the Independent Book Publishers Association or Book Manufacturing Institute?
Yeah, that's actually it's a really important question because you want all of these organizations coordinated to the best of our ability. When I started the Association of American Publishers and American Booksellers Association convened a meeting. It was in December, probably about 24 associations were brought together in a room at AAP in New York just to talk and it was a really compelling afternoon. And in my second year in this job, I went to Oren Piker, who at the time was AVA's CEO, and asked him if we might pick up doing that on a more frequent basis. So we created what was called the Association Advisory Council, which is of any organization that represents some aspect of book publishing is invited, and they meet quarterly. We were kind of the less frequent in the last year, but we're scheduled to meet quarterly going forward again. And we just talk, share information, often about upcoming events or major initiatives, sometimes things that are problems within the association world. For example, trying to find a common or a representative or sample policy for anti-harassment at in-person events came up. And there was just an association that was doing that, didn't have any issues, but wanted to be prepared when the time came if it unfortunately did. And so we had a discussion. Some organizations had already developed one, kind of shortcuts the work required. In other cases, we worked on things like healthcare across associations. Some organizations like the Authors Guild, American Booksellers Association represent small businesses or individuals. IBPA is certainly in that category. And we found a vendor that we can all use to be able to offer membership in these organizations a healthcare option. And it's those kinds of things that we've tried as BISG to foster, to make sure that people know what other organizations are doing. We attend other meetings. We go to IBPA's meetings, BMI, obviously the American Library Association, which is a significant event. So yeah, we do cooperate quite a bit. And I think it's been a component of our success because we know who to call when we need help.
Now, I have personally noticed that BISG has changed a lot under your leadership. It's trying to stay ahead of the changes in the industries. Can you give our audience just a brief summary of how BISG is helping publishers, large and small, navigate those major changes that are occurring in our industry?
Yeah, I think, the committee structure that I referred to a minute ago is a piece of that, committees and working groups. We bring people to a virtual meeting. All of our committee work is done online. They meet regularly. Committees are meeting every month. Working groups are typically every other month, sometimes a little bit more frequently, and a couple of or quarterly. But the notion is that you have an agenda, a set of topics, some research that's been done, and then you foster a conversation around it. So in that sense, we're solving problems that people bring to us or that we see. But one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of, particularly for publishers that may not be front and center, if you're a large publisher, you probably have the resources to be able to look around the corner a little bit and see where the industry's going. But most publishers, we estimate that there's something like 8,000 publishers in the United States right now.
Mm-hmm.
The big five get a lot of attention and they do publish the majority or the plurality of books. But there are a lot of other entities that are active in book publishing that don't understand necessarily how standards work, how to make best use of those standards, how to get their books discovered. And we want to make sure that they have a seat at the table. So we publish documents. Our BISAC code list, for example, which is 5,700 codes across 53 categories, that essentially define the content of a book. I mean, it's available as a paid download. That's really is for convenience factor for folks who are putting the full code list in a system that they own. But we make the full code list free, so anyone can look at it. So if you're a smaller publisher, smaller player, and you need access to the code list, you go to the BISG website, you search. It's all that information is there. It's the same information that you would download.
The publishing world is really evolving, wouldn't you say? And consolidation among retailers, among publishers, and among distributors has made it difficult for the smaller players. A lot of people aren't around who were around 5 years ago. So, Brian, what would you recommend for small to mid-sized publishers to be heard over all the noise, or even self-published authors, you as a metadata expert?
Right. Well, the first thing I'd say, and this isn't always popular news, I admit, is to understand the system that you're operating in. There's sometimes, particularly in the independent community, a sense that the system is rigged. I mean, that it's built to favor larger players. I think there are things that we probably could do to make it easier to operate within it if you're a medium or smaller size publisher. And we work on those things. We have an initiative around book publishing next to make it a lot more transparent. But the existing system is how books get discovered and sold. So understanding how it works is a piece of the puzzle. High quality metadata is the coin of the realm at this point. And by high quality, I mean not just complete, but really accurate for your book. You know, you want to spend time thinking about the BISAC codes that you assign to a book.
Hmm.
A lot of smaller publishers, it's the last thing they work on. Sometimes even in larger organizations, they assign it to an intern or somebody who hasn't read the book, an assistant, etc. Knowledge of what's in the book and how to best describe it is best done by somebody who's actually read the book and spends a little bit of time on it. The product description, marketing copy is a critical piece of the puzzle. And I think that, again, it deserves more attention. Those are components of really high quality metadata that are really useful. And I think as well, and I say this regularly, if you're trying to get into markets that you currently don't reach, a library market might be an example, make sure that your metadata is built and describes what a library's application is, that the prices are there, that the terms of the business models are included, and the like. There are a lot of different ways to use metadata to your advantage, but I think that in many cases it's kind of treated as a necessary evil rather than one of the core marketing opportunities that a publisher has.
And BISG is making resources available for a small or even a hybrid publisher to better understand how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, an example is our best practices for keywords, a guide that's available for free download on the BISG website. We have a similar product, much more extensive, on best practices for product metadata. If anything, it's a bit too big, and we've been working now for a couple of years to update it and make it more useful for the, I wouldn't say layman, but it's at least for somebody who doesn't have metadata as their core responsibility. And, you know, you still have to understand some basic components of how it works. Those aren't there. I mean, I think the requirements of metadata are not there to prevent smaller players from participating. They actually enable them. It's just, you have to learn it. And I think that that's been hard. That's why we publish these documents and make them freely available.
And that's great. And let's talk about what the industry seems to be, and the whole country, the whole world really seems to be talking about, which is AI. In his pivotal book, The AI Revolution in Book Publishing, industry consultant Thad McElroy posits that AI will offer the greatest benefits to authors versus publishers, giving them more power and autonomy. How do you see that, Brian? Do you agree with that?
You know, I have a lot of respect for that. He's a really informed observer. I struggle a little bit with this particular notion. Um, you know, part of it might be that I think there's still a significant commitment to physical inventory. 80% of the books or 70% of the books sold in the US market are ink and paper. And you still need a supply chain to be able to deliver that. Does that exist forever? Who knows? I mean, I can see around corners, but that's that's a big corner. But right now, I think that AI can certainly help authors, but the power and autonomy that they want, if they're creating digital books, there may be a path forward there. If they're only creating physical books, or if they want to still deliver physical books to bookstores um, and to consumers, then it's harder because you have to play within the existing framework. And I'm not sure AI liberates you from that.
Well, I think that, not totally agreeing with everything you just said, I think that what Thad was saying in his book, if I understood it correctly, was that AI gives an author the tools to replace some of the functions of a traditional publisher, such as marketing, even metadata creation, selection of BISAC codes, if properly used. And it's especially on that marketing side that an author can be maybe as effective as a small publisher. Does that make sense?
That one, I think, does. There are companies right now in the marketplace like Veristage that are offering some of those services. They're not clunky, but I think that there are still limitations. I'm not of the mind that the limitations should be the focus, meaning that I grew up in an era where typography changed from an art to a science. My first year in book publishing was 1983, or in publishing rather. I was working for a magazine. But in 1984, Apple came out with the first Macintosh. Typesetting changed forever within the decade, and
Right.
everybody said early on, this is just silly stuff. It's not nearly as good. The H and J, the kerning, everything was rudimentary, but it quickly moved from rudimentary to sufficient. And I worked on a launch of a magazine that was all desktop, 1990. So 7 years after I started. I think that AI is in that kind of curve right now where we can easily point out the things that don't work, but there are many things that could work. And if it embodies the understanding of the supply chain that, I was saying a moment ago that I'd encourage everybody to have, then yeah, it can help particularly small players, independent authors, you know, shortcut the process and maybe do it more reliably than they would if they were doing it underinformed. So on that sense, yeah, I agree with you and with Thad that there's an upside. I don't know that maybe there are multiple universes of publishing that exist, and there's an AI fueled one, and then there's a more traditional one.
I think it's an AI supported one. And the more proficient one becomes with using AI, the more tasks that can be replaced that are done that gives the author more time for actual writing. Anyway, one of the biggest problems that the industry is facing is too many titles. Self-publishing greatly increased the yearly new title count to over 2 million per year in the United States, up from 250 to 300,000 10, 15 years ago from traditional publishers before self-publishing became a big thing. And I know that from my Baker and Taylor days. We were messing around with all those numbers. So the AI generated books are adding even more, like at a frightening pace, and that really gums up the works on search. So, Brian, what can a publisher do to overcome that challenge of searchability?
Well, maybe there are two components to my answer here. What can a publisher do and what can a retailer do? Certainly publishers should try and do everything they can to make sure that their books are convey the legitimacy that comes with them, using things like the International Standard Name Identifier to identify the author or contributors to a book helps. It doesn't solve the problem that you've described, but at least says, all right, well, this is authored by a legitimate person. It also gives the retail platform the opportunity to look and say, all right, this bit, if ISNI is in widespread use and Larry Bennett, God forbid, authors 300 books in a 2-week period of time, that's a suggestion that maybe Larry Bennett's not, or is using something other than his writing ability to get those books completed and published. So it's a tool for retail platforms as well. But I think publishers do need to make sure that they have a complete set of metadata, that the descriptions of their product samples are made available so that people can look inside the book and find that it is legitimate and it's not just 10 pages of fluff and nothing more. Those things are all components of both metadata and good practice for working with retailers. I think an honest conversation, it's harder with smaller publishers, but an honest conversation with retail trading partners and distributors in some cases is also important to sort of say, hey, we've been looking at our own product listings and we're seeing these guys ahead and they're not legitimate. And I think you should take a look at it. Defending your own interests is important. No retail platform wants to host books that are a bad consumer experience. And what you're talking about are books in that category, but they need help certainly right now. Maybe there could be some better automated ways in the future, but they need help right now just getting a clear sense from the legitimate trading partners of where the spam is.
Have you seen, or in your experience at BISG and all the publishers that you talk to, do you get a sense that Amazon is making any kind of an effort to uh, filter out what you're calling bad books, what I'd certainly call bad books?
Well, I wouldn't call out Amazon specifically. It's it's a retail platform issue more broadly. I think they're all looking at this really carefully. It's a hard thing because on the one hand, at scale, those platforms operate successfully because they're easy for publishers, whether self-published or smaller or larger, to access and populate. That's part of how you become a large retail platform, and that's something that consumers value. So if you shut that off in some way, in an automated way, and you run the risk of cutting out legitimate books as well. I don't envy them the challenge, but I do know that this is an important issue. I've heard conversations from all retailers that are part of BISG saying, yeah, we got to get our arms around this because every time somebody buys a book that they don't think is legitimate, the wrath, it goes back to both the publisher and the retailer.
A- Absolutely. Well, continuing talking about AI, like the advent of railroads, steam engines, and transistors, AI is for book publishing potentially what I'd call disruptive technology. Do you, Brian, envision a radically different landscape for book publishers in the next 5 to 10 or 10 to 20 years? And is it maybe different for trade publishers versus academic and scholarly publishers?
Yeah, maybe I start with the end there. It is going to be, it's already different for trade versus academic and scholarly. Academic and scholarly have been digital really for the better part of the 21st century. And trade is still heavily print. It doesn't mean that it stays that way forever, but it is the way the book business works. That part of the business works right now. I think it will evolve at different rates and for different purposes across
Mhm.
different segments. The old adage is that there's not one type of publishing, there are 10 or 8. I mean, there's many different ways the models work.
Sure.
But you're asking really what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not sure that if you know what happens after 20 to 30, we can compare notes in 30 years. But what I would say in the next 5 to 10 is I don't see it as radically different. I do see it as different. You know, we've got a project in work that will continue for the next 5 years called Book Publishing Next. That's about a rework of the supply chain to make it the communications more two-way, to simplify some of the things that exist, the complicated sales reporting mechanisms that exist, particularly as the book business has grown more complicated over the last 15 years since the advent of digital. And I think that will change, but it'll be a coping mechanism, not a wholesale rethink. AI is a bit of a wild card. I think we're all trying to figure out how broadly it's going to affect the industry. And I tend to be not an AI skeptic, but an AI agnostic, which is my job is to run the supply chain. So we keep an eye on AI. It's one of our working groups, but I've not yet seen a an AI application that dramatically changes how I think about the supply chain. When that comes along, I'll tell you how radically I think it's going to shift.
Well, I guess we will see. Now, book publishing as an industry as a whole is a low margin, slow to maybe even no growth business if you factor in inflation. Most of the growth in the past few decades has come from digital. Ebooks and now audiobooks are kind of going wild. Brian, do you see opportunities for growth in specific genres or international markets, other formats that we haven't thought about?
Yeah, I mean, it is a genre dependent business. You know, you'll see sales reporting from major publishers, in particular, the ones that are public and reporting on a quarterly basis, that they'll talk about how they're up or down because of sometimes even just a single book that's particularly popular in a specific genre. Romance, romantasy, science fiction, and fantasy have all done really well in recent years, but sometimes it's as limited as the franchise or a small set of authors who are particularly popular. That drives a lot of the both the gains and the losses. International has been a challenge for most publishers, even though the largest big five are all international publishers. Four of the five are owned by international companies or headquarters elsewhere. But there haven't been that many books that are published in the United States and then emulated globally. It tends to be a territorial sale thing. And that leads me to think that the real growth over the next 10 years, maybe more, is in the area of rights, more effective exploitation of rights, better tracking of it. That's not an area where book publishers are particularly good right now. Most have relatively either proprietary or simple Excel based, sometimes even file cabinet based systems to track rights. That makes it hard to exploit them. It also makes it hard to make sure that you're defending them. So we've been doing a lot of work to try and simplify through our rights committee in particular, how reporting goes from a licensee to a licensor. We'll be debuting that in a second version in Frankfurt in October. But it's also the case that I think that more publishers need to be thinking about investing in rights management systems, because it's the core way that publishers earn money. And I
Yeah.
think that's where the growth is going to come.
Well, I can certainly see that, but the other side of the coin of that is going back to AI is one of one of the biggest impediments to trying to promote translated works is the translation costs. And with AI translation tools coming on board, that is becoming a lot less expensive. So I can see also, at least with my own more limited exposure to publishers, I see publishers thinking more about, instead of selling rights, just like with audiobooks, instead of selling rights, doing it themselves and taking care of the translation through AI, and then maybe finding a partner who's willing to sell the books in Poland and in a foreign market, especially with Spanish. And so keeping a greater part of the pie. Don't you think that there's some growth opportunities there as well, Brian?
I do. Two things I would say. One is that certainly, I mean, Thad McElroy, you talked about a little while ago, when he created the book that you cited, created translations using AI that were readily available. Thad knows better than I do how successful they were, but it would have been things that, for a small book like that, meaning, it's a niche topic. There are only so many people who are going to read it, but it would be impossible to justify translation using any other approach. So I do think that opens up new formats, and at least for that, and in new languages. I think the harder thing is, to the extent to which a supply chain is digital, you can make that work.
Hmm.
If it is physical, then you probably need a partner of some sort, whether it's a printer doing print on demand and then a distributor. It kind of falls into that more classic model. So I think that's one of the reasons I think you're seeing a lot of that work either being developing as small direct to consumer sales or staying digital. And I think that problem hasn't been solved just yet. And maybe it'll take time to get sorted out.
But one of the things I'm seeing, Brian, is Ingram in particular is making efforts to help these small to mid-sized publishers in foreign markets with expanded marketing services. I don't know how successful that is, but I've seen all kinds of announcements coming out of Ingram in the last few months about those types of services. Again, trying to really expand the pie, grow the pie.
Yeah, I mean, and they're struggling to. I'm not thinking specifically of Ingram, but the distributors are struggling to um, offer at scale those kinds of services, because it's that you have it has to be through a portal. You can't really justify a direct relationship of the sort that's been the case in the past with a publisher that might be producing one book in a year, but they are important to represent.
Sure.
So figuring out ways to support them, I think, is something that they have been focused on. I think it's a welcome addition to the marketplace.
Well, this has been great, Brian, and I'm going to ask you now the toughest question. What advice would you give to an aspiring or recent graduate who is interested in getting into book publishing industry today?
I used to teach in one of the graduate programs in publishing, and I taught like 6 or 7 semesters, and probably reached about 125 students. This is not necessarily the case. You don't have to be a graduate of one of those programs, but one of the things that I tried to say to every one of those classes was, think about going broader rather than deeper. Meaning, you may want to be the children's editor for at Penguin Random House, and there's one of those jobs, and you can work really hard to get it. But there are lots of parts of the industry that are interesting and effective, that you may not know about if you're focused only on editorial or only on operations or only on metadata, that when you get started, try to find ways to hop. The job I took first in magazine production didn't really, my goal was to run a magazine, which I never did achieve. But I started in production because I felt like it was the back of the elephant and I would see everything that happened before me. And that was true. I mean, if you're curious and you kind of are willing to talk with other people and other departments, understand the decisions they make, you can learn a lot about the business. And then I think that makes for a better career. It's frustrating, I think, when you're very now early on because there's only so many different paths to follow. If you're broad, you can kind of then choose. It is not always appreciated. Not every company operates with that philosophy. I just found it works really well in my career. And it's one of the reasons why I was joking at the beginning that it feels like I've done one of everything. It's probably not quite so bad. My through line on this is I'm really interested in how things work.
Hmm.
So that this job right now is the ideal job for me because it's how things work. But I do think that the broader you are early on in your career, the more likely it is you're going to make a decision about where you go next with a lot more information at your disposal.
Well, I think that's great advice, Brian, and we're grateful to you for being part of this conversation. And so, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk to you, Larry. Thank you very much for the kind words about BISG, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at our next committee and working group meetings.